are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Knocking Down Barriers for Outdoor Physical Activity. This webinar is brought to you through a partnership between the Texas Department of State Health Services School Health Program and the Texas Association for Health, Physical Education, Recreation, and Dance. My name is Anita Wheeler, and I'm the School Health Coordinator here at the Department of State Health Services. I would really like to thank the Texas Association for Health, Physical Education, Recreation, and Dance, as well as the Executive Director, Diana Everett, for collaborating on this project with us. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few items so you know how to participate in today's event. This is just a quick overview of the control panels to ensure that everyone has a good grounding on how to use the tools in GoToWebinar. We have taken a screenshot of an example of the attendee interface. You should see something that looks like this on your own computer desktop in the upper right-hand corner. If you are not seeing the full control panel, click the arrow in the orange box. The full control panel will be shown to you, and you will be able to use all the features within GoToWebinar. At this time, I would like to introduce Dr. Diana Everett, TAFERD's Executive Director, and Dr. Debbie Ray, TAFERD's past President. They are going to be participating in this webinar with us. As I mentioned, Diana is the Executive Director for the Texas Association for Health, Physical Education, Recreation, and Dance. Prior to joining TAFERD, in 1999, Dr. Everett was the Executive Director for the National Association for Girls and Women in Sports. She's a lifelong Texan, holds a doctorate in sports administration from Texas Women's University, a master's in physical education from Baylor University, and a bachelor's in physical education from the University of Texas at Arlington. Prior to moving into association management in 1995, she taught physical education, health, and biology. She has also coached 11 years at previous high schools in Texas. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Diana Everett.
Thanks, Anita. I appreciate that. It's my pleasure today to introduce you to Dr. Debbie Ray. Debbie is a full professor and associate dean of research and health sciences at Texas Christian University in Fort Worth. She taught physical education and coached in the public schools for 12 years prior to earning her doctorate in pedagogy and sports exercise psychology. She has published over 40 peer-reviewed articles and 14 books on physical activity, eating disorders, and adolescence. Her primary emphasis is on diversity, behavior change, and motivation. She has presented at over 250 local, regional, national, and international conferences. Her newest research project is called LINK, Let's Inspire Innovation in Kids. It's focused on moving schools to think differently about creating a learning environment that promotes rigor with a combination of recess, which is defined as unstructured outdoor play throughout the day, and character development weekly. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Debbie Ray.
Good morning. All right. Can everybody see? I hope so. All right, so the presentation today is on knocking down barriers for outdoor school physical activity. And I just want to thank TAFERD and Texas Department of State Health Services for their roles in bringing these webinars to each of you on a regular basis. I think it's really important that as we move into a new bill time period and thinking about where we're going with physical activity in schools in general, that we come together with some unity on a voice and making sure that we understand where we can make changes and how that will impact what happens in schools. So as I get started, I have a few things that I want to talk about. The first one is, what happens as a result of being indoors as much as we are? What does that do to us as human beings? And what are those barriers that end up keeping us from going outdoors? What are the benefits of being outdoors? What is the connection with learning? And then how do we shift our thinking so that we can start action steps, put a toolbox together in order to move in a positive direction with physical activity for our kids during the day? Much needed, as we know, through much of the CDC reports and pediatric council reports and so forth. As you can see on this slide, these are all the different types of emotions that people feel. And the reason I start with this is because sometimes, I'll ask a teacher, well, what is the emotion you're feeling? And they just go, I don't know, I'm tired. Well, tired is not really as much the emotion as whatever is on here that might be going towards that feeling of being tired. You might ask a child, what are you feeling? And they definitely will tell you, I feel frustration, or I'm unhappy, or I'm angry, or whatever it might be. And so as we think about using emotions that we have, if the emotions are more negative in how we feel, then this is going to impact our health hugely. And so as we talk today, I want to bring in a different angle that maybe we don't think about much, and that is that physical activity outdoors, being outdoors, whether it's physically active or just being in the moment outdoors, is hugely directed or related to the emotions that we feel in a happiness direction. So think about right now, if I were to point my little thing here between these two areas where we have annoyance, anger, rage, and we have terror, fear, and apprehension, these two areas right here are most seen in our country today related to distress. And so I want to talk from both directions about what we feel when we're out in schools. If we talk about fear as the first emotion that teachers feel a lot, the fear is that they need all the time they can get in the classroom, that this classroom time is supposed to be dedicated to as much content time as possible. Try not to be off task. Make sure that every minute that you're in there is taken up with either math, science, English language arts, social studies, or some variation of those pieces. And so there's a lot of pressure and a lot of fear that if they're not doing that, they're going to be marked down by somebody who comes in their room to evaluate. There's also a safety fear externally that over the years people have said it's not safe to be outside in many different elements because kids are apprehended, there are shootings, there may be somebody waiting in a corner, but it's just not a safe environment. And so it has brought us indoors for just about everything that we do from that particular perspective. Another is from a health concern. Over the years, we've heard a lot of data on skin cancer, and that if we're outside without sunscreen on, if we're out between 10 and 2 during the day, things like that will produce skin cancers, and it's the one thing that we're trying to stay away from. So, hey, if we just don't go outside during those times, we're better off. But it's being driven by another fear emotion. Another one is an internal, which would be more of the fear that if we're outside with these kids, that there will be more bullying going on. And there was a time where we saw a lot of research on being outdoors with kids, and that this was the prime time for kids to bully, and that they didn't understand how or why they shouldn't do that. And so, it was just a free-for-all, and we need to keep them in our control so that we don't have that fear. Next one is just loss of control of kids. Oh my gosh, if I get them outside, they're so irresponsible that we're just gonna lose control of them out on the outdoors, and it's a fear that teachers have of trying to keep control so that when it's time to come in, some of the basic questions I have or get are things like, Well, they just won't come. They'd rather stay outside, so I don't know how I'm going to get them in. So there's another fear driving teachers to keep kids indoors more. And then the last one is the children themselves just lacking responsibility. And that's come over some years of us taking more and more things away from them because they can't handle them. So one of the latest that, and it hadn't happened this year, it was last year, but in one of the states northeast of here, the story was that a playground ball hit a child in the head, and therefore they were taking the playground balls away from the kids on the playground. And even though I'm going to tell you there's a different reason for doing something like that, and I'll talk about that later, it's not because of lack of responsibility that we should be doing it. It should be because of whatever another reason from a play perspective is. But in saying that we're going to not do something because kids lack responsibility just means we need to help them gain responsibility again, not just continue to take more away. That doesn't help our children to be able to be productive citizens away from a school if we're not teaching them how to perform responsibility in the school. From an anger perspective, if we look at that other paradigm, we see that teachers and kids are angry today. And the reason that they're angry, one is you've got teachers angry because of out-of-control children in the environment of the classroom. And they feel like there are either too many kids in the classroom or that they have too many children who just don't know how to behave in the classroom. And so there's this out-of-control feel, and it just angers them that they have to deal with this and don't get to teach because they're handling behavioral problems all the time. There's expectations from administrators, and it's not that it's the administrator's fault. It's coming down from higher levels than that for federal funding, that we've got to have certain things in place so that children can pass an outcome test, a standardized test, as they move forward. And so there are expectations that are coming down from up above, and sometimes it's expectations that are not necessarily driven by testing, but driven by, we got to know more about the kids, we've got to have reports on a daily basis on what's going on in certain situations. And so there's all this stuff that happens on a daily basis that just sometimes can stir up anger in teachers. Job stability attached to student outcomes. You know, I'm just going to say right now that it's sad that we're having to attach a stability of a job to something that's out of their control. A child that sits down for a test, especially when they're being required to be indoors all day and then go take a test where the brain is not functioning on all levels, that's not a good scenario for our teachers to be put in those kinds of situations. It's not everywhere, but it does anger teachers when we have this kind of scenario out there. And then just feeling unsafe, not knowing what's going to come around the next corner, you know, feeling like somebody could come into a school building. We've had stories like that, and so just this unsafe nature can bring on anger as well. From a child's perspective, we also see that anger is, we have lots of anger episodes out there, either disruptive or more aggressive, and much of that I am finding through what we're doing with the LINK project, and I say much, not all, but much of it is due to the fact that we're not allowing our kids to go outside, and we're not allowing them to be active in a self-directed way. So as we talk more today, I mean, this is information that I just want you to keep in the back of your brain. As a result of anger or fear, these emotions bring on a fight or flight response. And many of you may already know this, but this is stuff that I just want you to understand on the front end before we get to the meat of today. So if you're in a situation in a classroom or in a hallway or somewhere in the school building, when that stimuli of something happening is sent to the brain, so you're fearful of something or angry about something, that stimuli is sent to the brain, it automatically deciphers it as a threat or a non-threat. If it's a threat, then the nervous system kicks in for survival. What we don't realize is that when we are angry or fearful on a regular basis, daily basis, whether it's teachers, administrators, or kids, this becomes a chronic state in the fight or flight response, which keeps the nervous system activated for survival. It also throws it into the immune system, the cardio system. I mean, everything starts working together to keep the body alive in survival mode. It will stay activated until there's no longer a threat. The problem is that we as a society are living in this type of emotional threat at this point, so it's become normalized. We have coped with it for so long that we no longer see it as a threat to us. We see it as just a normal way of life. So when I talk to individuals on a regular basis about, well, you're angry about this or you're fearful about this, and they'll go, well, yeah, I am. And I'll say, and how long have you been that way? Well, I get that way on a regular basis. And you don't think that that's a threat to your ability to cope with life, which then brings on other situations. And so until you are over that anger or fear, you can't return to a calmness or relaxed state. Physiological symptoms that come from this are things that maybe you'll recognize, maybe you don't, but increased heart rate, increased blood pressure, increased blood flow, your sugar levels will go up, your cortisol levels as a result of the glucose go up, and cortisol at high levels is dangerous for your bodies. It increases the ability for blood clotting to happen, strokes, heart attacks. All these things can happen as a result of you having anger or emotion, or any of your staff, teachers, administrators, and kids in the schools. What are the long-term effects of this? Well, from a nervous system perspective, I'm just going to name some of the things that are impactful here. Asthma, tension headaches, migraines, TMJ, and coronary heart disease. If you know of somebody who's having these kinds of things and you wonder, oh yeah, but it's just part of, they're just having these issues. Not necessarily. We know that 75% to 85% of all of our issues like this, diseases such as these, are stress related. And so if this is happening in our schools, as I show you in a minute, it's happening also because we're staying indoors more and not getting outdoors as much. From the immune system side, the cold. I don't know how many of you have already had one this year, but I've been around it. It's been all around me in my building, and I keep going, okay, keep my immune system up, keep going outside, keep making sure I'm staying active, because and keeping my stress level down. Why? Because this is what helps us develop the cold or the flu or allergies, rheumatoid arthritis, lupus, multiple sclerosis, Crohn's disease, cancer, ulcers. These are all immune system disorders that are happening many times because of stress in our lives related to anger and fear. So let's look at indoors versus outdoors. What we know in the literature, and I'm showing on a regular basis with the LINK project these days, is that the indoors produces a sympathetic nervous system response. So when we talked a minute ago about what happens in fight or flight response, this is what brings on that sympathetic nervous system response, which is high cortisol levels in order to keep your body at a fight or flight response state until you see a threat is gone, and then you can come back to relax. Well, if we never see a threat gone until summertime, what does that do to our bodies? It doesn't give it enough recovery time before we're right back in it again. Whereas the outdoors actually produces the parasympathetic nervous system response. What does that mean? That is your relaxed state. That's the threat is gone and you feel comfortable about where you are and what you're doing. Can you imagine if our teachers and our kids are able to experience that throughout the day? What happens as a result is that their parasympathetic nervous system kicks in and they're able to relax at different parts of that day and be able to get their brains focused again on, just being comfortable. Cortisol levels go down and they're able to relax more into the classroom when they're in there. If we think about what are these barriers of going outdoors, we need to think about, I mean, there's some serious barriers. And I will just tell you, and you'll hear me say it more than once, the barriers are so big that if we don't train on how to attack the barriers, we cannot change. And I'm seeing that on a regular basis. I train extensively on barriers. I train extensively on why it's important to be outdoors. These trainings that I do with teachers are very important because if you don't have them, they will not stick to change. They will go back to being indoors. It's a lot easier to do that than to make the changes that I'm going to recommend. Time needed in the classroom is a barrier. The fact that how can we spend any time at all outside when we've got all these requirements that we've got to do inside? Transition to and from the classroom to the outdoors. It takes us too much time to get to the outdoors. It takes us too much time to get back in. We're losing precious time on doing that and not enough time on what we need to be focused on, especially the older the kids get. So for kindergarten, first grade, teachers pretty much, you know, they may be willing to move in this direction, but you start getting into second, third, fourth, fifth grade, and all of a sudden they're like, I don't have this kind of time, and you can't make me. I've got to stay focused. I've got a lot of material to do. The research that's out there right now, there are books and articles on the fact that, well, you know, we can't get outside, but if we'll go ahead and do movement in the classroom, if we'll go ahead and get the little bouncy seats for them to sit on, or the little treadmills to walk on, or have them do stand-up desk, or we have the little wheels that they can rotate their feet on. If we do that, we see that the academics, that their learning gets better. The problem with that is that the structure is still there. They're not getting unstructured time outdoors, and I'll talk about benefits in a minute of what those benefits are that get away from the stress responses. Right now, all you're doing is keeping them in a stress response state. The other thing is students are unruly outdoors, so why even take them out there? Let's just keep them indoors where we have control over them. Bullying on the playground. Extreme temperatures, and you know, in Texas, come on, really, do we have extreme temperatures? I know that I can't hear you on the other end, and some of you may feel that we do, but if you haven't been to Wisconsin or New York or Alaska in the wintertime, Canada, then you don't know extreme temperatures. We're talking 50 below, and that is an extreme temperature. If you are in hotter than where we are, we may get up to 104 at max in the summertime into the fall. But if you think about other countries, they may get up even higher than that. And yes, that is extreme, but we have, through expanding some weather conditions, we've been able to bring in a much more broad extreme temperature guideline based on Center for Disease Control recommendations and weather groups around that talk about recommendations for what's safe. And then the other thing that's a barrier is that, and I heard this so much when I first started the LINK project, is, well, so many of our kids have allergies, asthma, health issues. And my thing is, what did you just hear me say? What are sometimes the worst things that are going on because of anger and fear are allergies, asthma, and health issues. If we really want to boost the immune system and the nervous system and bring down the stress levels, the best way to do that is going outdoors, which then deters the allergies, the asthma, and the health issues. Since we started going outdoors with the kids, we don't have near as many complaints about kids having these issues as they did before when they were indoors all the time. From a benefits perspective, let me just say, one of the biggest benefits you have is the natural D3 that comes from the sun. And what I mean by this is that the sun is the main generator into our skin of something that boosts our immune system through a normal hormone called D3. It produces it normally. We're having to feed our kids through supplements D3 on a regular basis because of the allergies, asthma, and other health issues. the doctors are now giving them D3 to boost that. Well, if we were outdoors more, we'd be able to get that naturally, and we wouldn't have to do such supplemental production of this. Natural light, fresh air. These are both things that are very, very important. I go into some schools where they don't even have a window. They're in an indoor space. So they're just, all they're doing is living wall to wall with simulated light. It may be lower light. It may be, some kind of incandescent light. I mean, you name it. It's just not the natural light. And when they're outdoors, it changes the patterns of the eyes to be able to work and focus differently than when we're indoors all the time. And then you add to it the computers, and you've got even more issues related to that. The air that we breathe, we are so fortunate most times of the year to be able to breathe good air here. If we were in another country where air is not high quality, that would be a sad state, because it would be detrimental for us to be outdoors as much. But here we've got great air to be able to breathe, and we should be out there breathing that instead of the refiltered air in the building so much. When I get to these next ones, writing skills and math science skills, we know in the research that being outdoors, especially from an unstructured perspective, that kids will spend about a third of the time doing math and science skills, and things like building things, working in water, being able to see what happens in sand, being able to see different textures, working off of what happens with animal and plant life. So these are all things that happen with math and science. From a writing skill perspective, what we've noticed with the play environment and the physical education environment is that the kids are speeding up their writing skills by about 6 months in first grade to a more controlled, between the lines writing, because of the fact that they are doing such dexterity things outdoors, climbing and gripping things, that it has improved their writing skills tremendously. And then we know, as you've heard me talk, about the stress reduction piece. I'm just going to give a link at a glance, because I do want you to know that in 1 year's time, last year in 4 public schools, these are the kinds of results that we were able to pick up on. One is that behaviorally in the classroom, the one thing that you want to be able to see is that they are behaving, focused, being able to really engage in the lessons, that their brains are functioning on all cylinders and not just trying to fight being tired all the time. And so you'll see here that linked schools improved 22 to 28%, while the comparison schools improved 0 to 2%. And that 0 to 2 is just what we would attribute to developmental processes. BMI, linked kids lost on average a ½ pound over that year, while the comparison kids gained an average of a pound over that year. With listening effort, the linked kids were able to use less listening energy throughout the day, which what that equates to is linked kids were less tired and much more focused all throughout the day. And in fact, the data that we showed that they could take whatever content you wanted to teach them throughout the day, and it wouldn't matter when you taught it. They would be fine. Whereas the comparison school kids, they weren't fresh even in the fall when they first started through the spring. They never did gain the ability to be able to focus in the classroom. Social emotional learning, we saw that the linked kids, as a result of having a character development curriculum and the recess, were able to improve their empathy and decrease their bullying as a result of the type of program this was. And then math scores, the intervention schools improved 2 to 3% over the comparison by the end. The reading scores, 2 to 7% improvement over the comparison schools at the end of the year. And y'all, you need to keep in mind that this was 4.5 to 6 weeks per year less content time in the intervention schools, because they were doing 4 recesses a day and a positive action curriculum throughout the week. Now, I'll talk about this again later. I am not suggesting that every school go out and put 4 15-minute recesses in now without proper training, without moving that direction, nor would I say to do those 4 recesses without having a very effective curriculum like Positive Action out there to help curb the kinds of things that can go on, especially when you first get started. We know that through different recess position statements, they want you to have essential components of recess out there. They want it to be an unstructured physical activity environment. They say that time should be allotted within every school day for them to be able to enjoy supervised recess, and that should be separate from physical education, and that we should have both, that we should have recess and physical education. I totally agree with that. There should be time for recess, which is unstructured outdoor play, and we should have time for physical education, outdoor structured skill development time. And both of these things are very, very important to what we do for our kids now and what we do for the future of them. Here's where my warning comes in. And the reason I'm giving you a warning is because, and I've told you this warning already, but I just want to make sure that we're on the same page with this. The warning is about everybody wants to just go out and put 4 recesses in. This seems to work. It seems to be a great thing. We ought to go ahead and put our physical education in. Let's see if we can change federal and state laws to make sure that there's mandated requirements, that we have these things in our schools. It's required. We have to make this all happen. There are problems with this because, as I told you before, this is a cultural shift. This is not just put it out there and let it happen. We do a lot of things in schools based that way. We put bills in place and we say, okay, by, they say in July these things have gone through. By August we have to mandate them. Well, that angers people. It angers our educational system because now they haven't had time to think it through. They haven't had time to try to work it out. And they come to school and all of a sudden they just got to put it together. And that's the wrong way to do things. You don't mandate it and just say, do it. People do not buy into change that way. I'm a change expert, and I will tell you that it takes me 3 full days to turn a person's mind around to believe differently about why outdoors is so important. So this change is not going to just happen, click your fingers, wiggle your nose, and everything's going to happen the way you want it to. So resistance to adding more recess. People have to believe in the change. They have to believe that physical education and recess in the schools is important. They have to understand why it's important. They have to understand that it will be more beneficial for their kids. And they have to understand that somebody's not going to be pressuring them from the top, saying they still have to have these other requirements met while adding this to the day. And most schools, if you say, let's do this, they'll say, well, then we need to add time to the day. And my position on this is, no, you don't need to add time to the day. In fact, we probably need to have less time in the day for school and more time for exploration and the ability for kids, especially the younger kids, to be able to figure things out along with learning in the classroom. So we have a belief, we have routines that have to change, we have the pressure to perform, we have instability. This has been huge. I've had in some of the schools that we've worked in, you'll have 3 to 4 teachers in one grade level leave the next year, or a principal leave before the school year starts. Well, what happens then? Are you going to stay with what you were doing before, or do things change completely? These are all instabilities that you have to think about as you go, okay, is a law really going to be beneficial for us, or should we be at the local level and really make things work at the local level and make sure they're working on all cylinders with everybody around us? We believe in it, we want to adopt something differently, and that we're going to give the support to do so. Getting it right with one recess, to me, is more important than trying to roll out a lot of recesses and nobody's doing it right. If you're not doing a recess at all, start with one. Get one recess in there. If you're not doing physical education all days of the week, start with getting physical education in there at least 3 days a week or 4 days a week, or whatever it is that you can do, but start somewhere. But to do that means that there's got to be scheduling changes, and everybody's got to be working together on this. And last but not least, and you'll hear me say this a number of times, more isn't always better. Quality is what's better, not quantity. we've been doing quantity for a long time, and the results are they're not good. If we want to make things better, we've got to have quality. We've got to execute quality better. We've got to know what the quality is. We've got to identify the real objectives that we want to master, be proficient in, and then move forward with that. It's easier for us right now to move outdoors through PE than it is to do things through recess. And I want to spend a little, couple of minutes on this, because physical education has even come inside, and that frustrates me. I train physical education teachers. I train them to go outside and do things outside. And then I find, I go out to watch one, and they're like, oh, yeah, well, I'm inside because I've got too many kids, and this just helps me to keep control of those kids. It keeps everything in place. I've got more equipment to use inside. I don't have to worry about carrying it outside. There are all these things that end up happening, and as a result, we have indoor PE most of the time. Well, we need to be outdoors. Physical education is an outdoor, this is a place that we've got usually fields to be able to use. We've got equipment that we can go outdoors to use. We need to be doing that. So if schools right now are not taking PE outdoors, that needs to be one of the first things that changes. And our physical educators need to be the first ones to move this outdoors. As a result, the kids are going to become more comfortable with being outdoors, so that when you start moving a recess in place, they're more comfortable with being outdoors with an unstructured position as well. So that's just an aside that we really need to focus on getting physical education in the schools regularly, and then we need to move them outside with some of the stuff that we work on. If you're going to roll out changes successfully, as I've said before, training is essential. You don't make changes within 2 weeks of doing something. You really need to have that change being made way in advance. That's why I do trainings in the spring before we ever launch something in the fall. They have to have time to digest it. And to me, it's all about looking ahead and making sure that you've got things in place before you start rolling them out. I will say that as a result of what we do with our training and our ongoing training, even in the next years, as somebody rolls out stuff like this with cultural shifts, we find that the first year is very difficult for the teachers and the kids. Not the kids. The kids are great, but it's hard for the teachers, and it's because they have a difficult time trying to balance what they've been teaching and what they need to teach, and the amount of time that they are using to go to recess and do the positive action curriculum. I will tell you that with us working with them on a regular basis, we've learned kind of how things pair out now, what needs to happen in different school settings, and teachers become much more comfortable. So by the second year, they're much more able to go and do what is required of them than even the first year. But if you don't have somebody out there working with them on a regular basis, principals don't have time, counselors don't have time, interventionists don't have time. So what happens? Teachers will go back inside and say, this is too hard, I can't get everything done, and I'm not going to do this. And so these are things that rolling out change successfully, you've got to consider these things before you move in that direction. Determine what type of recess you're going to have. Determine the schedule of recess in physical education. Start small. Develop that routine. Make sure that you have a very effective character development curriculum. I only use positive action only because I know the power that that curriculum has. And as a result, it's what I use in the schools, especially if we're going to do that much change. So with that, you do have some support at your fingertips that you can use to help you with whatever position you're in right now and how to try to move your schools or school district in the direction of more physical activity outdoors. But I hope that you've gotten from me today that outdoors is important, that getting out there, maybe once in the morning and once in the afternoon is a good thing to do. And probably the the most important thing is that you've got to have really good routines down on how you're going to do things, and that's what we're doing in schools right now, is we're making sure that they're able to be productive and successful as they roll out different changes that happen to bring us to a different place with physical activity outdoors in a school setting. So last thing I want to talk about is federal, state, local policies. I think you've probably heard from me today, and I hope you have, that I'm all for local control and not federal and state control. I feel like that's what's gotten us in the mess that we're in, is that we put too many requirements, mandated requirements that you have to do this specific prescription, instead of allowing the schools to be able to figure out how a prescription can work. You have to have it this way. And so I've had people write into me and say they want me to support them for 50 minutes of recess mandated for a whole state every day. And now that you've heard me talk, I hope you realize that probably what I would say, I hope you know that I would say to them, that's too much daily to require, mandate for everybody in the state to do, when right now some of them may be doing 0 recess at this point, or 0 physical education at this point. To say all of a sudden we want to jump from 0 to 60 or 0 to 50 is you're causing yourself a lot of heartache in trying to do that. We know that you have an hour recess daily. Why can't we do it? Well, y'all could. But I hope you've heard me say why it doesn't just happen by snapping your fingers, is that change takes time. And change has to be in the hand of the beholder, which means the administrators, the teachers, the kids, everybody's got to be on the same page. How much is good without tipping the scale? I would tell you that if you were to go to your schools and say, hey, we'd like to put in a 15-minute recess in the morning and a 15-minute recess in the afternoon, and we have physical education, it could be daily. I hope it's daily. I would love for it to be daily, but if it's not, let's work towards that goal. So, or if you want to have recess in the morning and physical education in the afternoon, you know, whatever that you want to start with that'll get you somewhere. That's what you need to do. But don't try to say, well, I'm going to try to do the schedule that Dr. Ray and her team are doing out in the schools. You've got to be able to have more support than to just go out there and say, we're just going to launch this with where we are. And then, do we want federal and state requirements for schools? And I'll talk to you about any of this. You can ask me any questions you want. I'm going to open it up to you in like three minutes here. But what I do want you to realize is, if we do have federal and state requirements, a state requirement such as right now, the House bill, the Senate bill that says we need to have 135 minutes of physical education daily, we need, or a week, or we need to have 150 minutes, 250 minutes, you know, whatever that is. If we say that there has to be so much physical education, we've got the support to do that. We can implement. I would love to see, we need to have 45 minutes or 50 minutes of physical education daily. We could implement that because we have physical education teachers in schools. We can implement structured physical education in schools. But when it comes to recess, this becomes a classroom teacher's position to do. And you could say, yeah, I'm going to hire somebody to come in and do recess. Y'all, teachers need the recess also. This is not just kids. What did I tell you about outdoors? The outdoors is the parasympathetic nervous system response. It's the relaxed response. What did I tell you at the beginning about anger and fear? Our teachers are feeling it on a regular basis. We have teachers that are leaving after 5 years of teaching. We've got to get our teachers outside just as much as we've got to get our kids outside. So this is not about mandating the state or federal requirements for schools. It's about giving the local control back. So when y'all are going after, you know, trying to push bills out there to say we want states to require things, it needs to be more along the lines of things that we can do something about, that doesn't create a lot of change and chaos in the school at this point, until we can roll out trainings and help teachers to understand this better and start to train our teachers, our pre-service teachers, better to be ready for stuff like this. This is, I mean, we got here over 30 to 40 years, and it's going to take some time to get us back. It's not an answer that we can just have in one day. So I appreciate your time today. I know that you probably have some questions at this point. I hope I have gone in the direction that you would really like to see happen. And at this point, I'll open it up to you all to ask whatever it is that you'd like to ask.
Thank you, Dr. Ray, for your wisdom about change and your insight into making, positive change as far as students in recess. At this point, I'd like to remind our audience that they can still submit questions through the question box in the question pane in the attendee control panel. We do have a couple questions that, hopefully you can kind of give us a little bit more insight into. If you can you describe what self-directed play looks like?
Yeah, that's a great question. I use the word unstructured a lot, and I use the term self-directed. And what I mean by that is that the teachers are not getting involved in the play that the kids are doing. So self-directed means that when you go outside for that play break or recess break, that these kids are able to play in a way that their brains are ready to accept. So instead of saying, well, some of you can go over here and play on this equipment and some of you can go over here and play on this equipment, or we're going to have a line that you have to stand in line and wait for the swings, or you have to stand in line and wait for the slides, we just tell them, go and play, and when something's available, go and use it. But we don't want them to wait in line for something, because that takes away from their ability to be unstructured in their own play environment. So, there are a lot of things that go into that as far as how you build self-direction for kids. I don't go out there and tell kids how to self-direct. They're very good at it on their own. But it's the teachers that have to get out of the way. And we have to train a lot on that, because teachers still feel that they have to go take care of things when, in fact, the kids can really take care of it themselves. But as I said, the character development is really, really important, because that helps build some base for the kids to be able to use their responsibility and their character out on the playground as well.
Thank you. I think one of the things that you speak about in self-directed is it's allowing children to use some of their creativity. So that leads into another question we've received. Talking about the creativity and how self-directed play can connect children to a different side of themselves as far as the creativity. Could you speak to that a little bit?
Sure. I'll just give you some stories. Creativity works in many different ways out on the playground. One of the first years that we were out there, we started in 2 private schools, and this particular one of the private schools was learning about, well, I won't give that part away. I'll just say that we walked out on the playground one day, and some children were taking hula hoops, putting them on the ground, putting a tennis ball in the middle of the hula hoop, and then sitting down on the tennis ball. Now, I'm going to let you think about that for a second. I know when I saw it, I thought, oh my gosh, what are we getting into with our kids doing something like this on the playground? What have we done? So I went up to the teacher and I said, can you shed some light on what's going on with these kids on the playground? And she just laughed. She said, oh, yeah, we're learning about chicks hatching from eggs. So you can just imagine, then it dawned on me, oh, they're being very creative with their ability to learn about chicks and what they can do on the playground. Now, I will tell you, it concerned me if they thought they were going to sit there for a long time and that tennis ball was going to hatch. But from a creative standpoint, that was the ability for their brains to really take a learning piece and take it to the outdoors for creativity. Another one was, and I put problem solving in this category as well, But another one where 3 girls went out to, and this was last year, went out to a fence line and saw a tin can, like a Dr. Pepper can, Coke can, on the other side of the fence. And they started thinking about, we really want to play with this can. And so between the 3 of them, they started working that can up the other side of the fence. It was chain link, up the other side of the fence with a stick and their fingers, and pushing it up, pushing it up, pushing it up until they got it over the top of the fence and down on their side where they could play with it. They'd realized they couldn't get it through the chain link and they couldn't get it under, but if they could get it over, that was working together and they could actually get it done. And so they were being creative with making things happen. On another note, and I'm going to take this from a math, science / creative side, 3 boys were playing with under a tree with a group of ants that were not biting ants. They weren't like a red ant, but they were taking them and trying to, and I'll see if we can get the picture of this. They would take an ant, they'd take it out into the sun, they'd put it in their palm and see if the sun would kill them. And so they were taking this ant, putting it in their palm. They'd go out there and realize the ant was already dead because they had squeezed it to death before they ever got it out there. And they did this several times before they finally realized that, okay, I can't squeeze so hard. Then they'd put it in their hand again, and voila, the ant would move around on their hand, and the sun didn't kill them, and they were figuring things out. And they were doing it in a collective group, and they were just really working on, this was a hard project for them in that 15-minute recess that they had. These are the kinds of things that are going on a regular basis on the playground with creativity and problem solving.
Thank you, Dr. Ray. Along those same lines, we've had a question come in asking about some of the anecdotal stories you've had from teachers as it relates to the emotional and behavioral responses that they've actually seen. You gave us some really good data that showed change in behavior and emotional responses, but if you could speak a little bit to what you've heard from some of the teachers who've been involved in this project and involved with implementing more recess during the school day.
Sure. I'd love to. I'm going to start with a teacher response about herself. She said to me last week, I was out there just to do some observations, and this is a woman who, let's see, it'd be 3 years ago, because we've been in that school 2 years now, but we did the training in the spring before we launched in 2015. Yeah, 2015. So she said to me, I just need to tell you something. I said, okay. She said, when I first started, I didn't think that being outdoors was going to be that good, and that it was going to be spending a lot of time away from me working with my kids. And I really was not very happy with you coming in and you wanting to do this, and I didn't think this was going to be a good thing for me or my kids. But I want you to know that a couple of weeks ago, I had to keep a couple of my kids in. It was a very cold day. I think it was close to 13 degrees outside, and our teachers were going out with the kids. But these 2 kids, they weren't fever sick, they weren't throwing up sick. They just had bad coughs, runny noses, and it just wasn't going to be a good thing for them to be outdoors in the elements. So she said, as I had suggested, that they have one teacher who rotates each recess to stay indoors with the kids and that are needing to stay in for that particular temperature time. And she said, so I decided that since they were my kids, they didn't really pertain to the others, I was going to let the other teachers go out and I was going to stay inside all day. And she said, I realized as the time went on, I was just drained. And she said, I was tired. I thought the day went on forever. I couldn't believe how slow this day was. And then it dawned on me that I wasn't getting my recess time, and that as a result, I was just physically zapped of my energy. And she said it made it hard on me and the kids in school again. I was short with them in class. It started bringing back these emotions that I was experiencing before Link, and I realized they were coming back just in one day from not being able to experience recess. And that hit me hard. That was like, oh my gosh, this is huge. But let me give you some examples of the kids. transition from the outside back into class, and we see this on a regular basis in every school we go into once they get started with recess, the protocol that we use. They come in and they're back to work within 1 minute of getting in the classroom. That's unheard of in schools where you don't train them and you just have a recess time. It usually takes anywhere from 3 to 5 minutes to get them back in the door, and then once you get them in class, it takes another 3 to 5 minutes to settle them down. And that's why teachers really don't want to do stuff like this, is because they think, well, I don't have that time to waste on just getting them focused again back in the room. And with our protocols, they're able to, once they get back from recess, they get right back on point, they get to work, and they go after it. A couple of other examples. One is, I hear several stories just on this kind of story, where a child is in class, there may be several children in class working on a story, and the teacher will say, okay, we're going to stop for now, we'll come back to it later, and the 1, 2, 3 children will say, oh, can we just work a little bit longer? We need to finish what we started. Oh my gosh, how many times do you hear kids say that? They usually don't. I mean, usually it's like, yep, can't wait to get off this and get on to something else because I'm bored, or my brain can't stay with it, and that's not the case. I had a story last week about a teacher who came to me and she showed me the writing that the student had done, first grade, and the first grader spelled almost every word correctly. I think there was only one word she didn't spell correctly. She was within the lines, and the story was really a good story. And the student said, I really enjoyed being able to just sit down and put my thoughts on paper. How many first graders do you hear do that? And then the other kids enjoyed listening to that story. It wasn't up and about and moving around. When we talk about the types of off-task behaviors we see, or what we don't see, or the improvements in that, we don't see near the fidgeting anymore, the verbal talking, getting up and roaming around, pulling stuff out of cabinets, going and getting drinks of water, going to the bathroom. They stop all that as a result of getting their recesses.
Thank you, Dr. Ray. We've come to the point where we're going to have to close down our webinar. However, looking at the questions and all of the information that's been provided today, we will have it available. We will upload the information. We'll also send it out in the Friday Beat. We'd like to thank you, Dr. Ray, for taking the time to be with us today, as well as Diane Everett for helping us in this collaborative process. If you have any additional questions, please feel free to submit them to the email address here on the slide, and we'll be happy to get them to Dr. Ray and be able to put them out there for you. Again, thank you for joining the webinar today. We hope that you've gotten some really good ideas and information about the importance of unstructured play, and also the key concept of really looking at this from a local level. At this point, we're going to end our webinar, and thank you very much for attending.